Right. Well, here we are. Uh, it's now 4:16 a.m. where I'm at, and I just got done uh, driving for 10 hours with a couple breaks. And the breaks occurred simply due to the fact that there were screaming kids. So, uh, uh, let's see. I had 3 liters of coffee, so I should be fine in that regard. But I'm not exactly thinking too straight, so I figure on sticking to a topic that I can actually almost literally talk about in my sleep. So we're going to talk about taxing the rich. And what we're going to do is we're going to explore the emotional implications of taxing the rich. And no, I'm not going to be drinking any more coffee because if I do, I'm going to be completely jittery and wired if I'm not already. Now, the emotional implications of taxing the rich depend an awful lot on whether you're rich or poor. And if, for example, you're rich, obviously, you're not going to like that idea too much unless there are ways for you to benefit from it. And if you're poor, many poor people like the idea of taxing the rich due to the fact that it makes them feel like the rich are getting what's coming to them. So I figured on starting the stream by reading a piece by Mr. Shane Selman, who is a business owner at Artifacture, and was from 2010 to present. I'll give you guys the link here and put it into the chat. And this particular piece, so why do liberals think that it's morally acceptable to slap higher tax rates against richer people? Do they hate successful people? In order to be fair, we as a society have decided that taxation should be as a percentage of income, in part because there's such a large gap between the poor and the very rich. In general, the principle is that the people that benefit most from the government should pay the most as a percentage of their income to fund it. Many of my conservative friends like to point to welfare and social safety net programs as more benefit because people would go hungry, be homeless, or die without them. But this is a flawed comparison. While these are valuable in terms of raw survival, their cost in real terms is a trivial portion of the cost of government. In terms of real dollars, the richer you are, the more you benefit from the federal government, and thus, the larger percentage of your income should go to finance the government, to a limit. Obviously, ours happens to be 39.6% of adjusted income. That adjusted portion is important too. But let's keep it simple and answer some basic questions. Who benefits most from the interstate highway system in real dollars? Bob, who gets to work a little faster and takes a vacation a couple of times a year? Or FedEx, UPS, Walmart, and Amazon, who move hundreds of billions of dollars of goods over them every single day? Who benefits more from public education? Bob, who sends his kid to school at 1, or every single employer in the country that has provided an educated and literate workforce? Who benefits more from the court system? Small businesses and individuals that generally lack the resources to access it efficiently to defend their interests? Or wealthy individuals and major corporations that rely on it for contract enforcement of all sorts to the tune of literally trillions of dollars a year? In every major category of government except perhaps military force, the richer you are, the bigger you are. The more you have, the more you benefit from the things the government provides. So no, we don't hate successful people, nor do we want to cut them off at the knees. I'm a business owner myself, so that would be self-defeating. What we do want, however, is for the entities who benefit the most from government, be they human or legal economic construct, corporation, to contribute the most to cover the cost of it. Okay. So, on the surface, it sounds like he's making the argument you use it more, you pay for it more. Sorry, I'm going to have to close or attempt to close the door a little bit more tightly. I can't think. So on the surface, um, Mr. Selman is making the argument that if you benefit more from a service, you should pay more for it. And those would be services that the government provides, such as infrastructure, the courts, and so on. Uh, so I think it's interesting, then, that he would go and say here in paragraph 2, or rather in his little segment 2, in general, the principle is the people that benefit most from the government should pay the most as a percentage of their income to fund it. But then if he goes and looks and says, what we do want, however, is for the entities who benefit the most from government, be they human or legal economic construct, to contribute the most to cover the cost of it. And then he specifies that in every major category of government, except perhaps military force, the richer you are, the bigger you are, the more you have, the more you benefit from the things the government provides. Well, they even benefit from the military. Being able to ship things across the world is definitely a plus for people that want to export their products or import stuff from other countries and so on. But the real kicker is that he's talking not about percentages necessarily, but he's talking real dollars. So I would hazard to guess, if, let's say, I make $50,000 a year and pay, we'll just do something easy. Say I pay 20% in taxes, and someone else makes $500,000 a year and also pays 20% in taxes. Well, I would be paying $10,000 in taxes, and this other person would be paying $100,000 in taxes. Now, due to the fact that he has more money, one could argue that it doesn't hurt him as much to pay the 100 as it hurts me to pay the 10. But you see, it all depends on what it is he's trying to do. You see, this second paragraph, this whole idea of paying a bigger percentage to fund something, is flawed in the sense that it's predicated upon envy. Ultimately, it boils down to envy. It boils down to how people interact with other people. And this whole not wanting to cut rich people off at the knees, I mean, I can understand some rich people actually do buy into this idea because they've been brainwashed into it. They've been told this their whole lives, and they think that it's actually a good idea. Unfortunately, this emotional anchor, this emotional hold that the idea has, makes them think that they're not paying their fair share unless they're getting taxed more. And of course, this is for wage earners. This is for wage earners, specifically the 39% tax and so on. For corporations, it's different. Right, the business tax rate is completely different, and ultimately you can go and finagle all sorts of different things depending on how you decide to run your own business, to still wind up paying lower taxes than you would if you take all of whatever you would get as income. So there are all sorts of loopholes that either Mr. Selman is not utilizing himself, or that he somehow managed to play mental gymnastics around in order to show how he's really being taxed at a higher rate and, having things be fair, but still ultimately going and getting the lower corporate tax rate for what it is that he's doing. So you wind up having the system set up such that uh, poor people can envy the rich and think that they're giving the rich the short end of the stick by making them pay more in taxes, because income tax is all they understand. I work, have you? I work 40 hours a week. I get my paycheck, and then salaries too if I wind up having salaried employees. So this whole idea is actually put forth by smart, manipulative people to manipulate people into thinking that the rich are getting what's coming to them. But that's not ever going to be the case. First off, the government is afraid of rich people because rich people can leave. Rich people can go and take their business elsewhere. Rich people can go and incorporate elsewhere. Rich people will always be able to hire lawyers to stay one step ahead of lawmakers. And so, the lawmakers have an incentive to build loopholes into the system in order to keep the rich people around, while still making the people that feel envious be able to feel like they're sticking it to the big man by voting them a bigger taxes. This is entirely a status monkey thing. The people on the low part of the heap want to drag down the people at the top. They want to cut the totem pole off right above their head, or at least say make the ladder a little more difficult for people to climb. And interestingly, if you're doing this in terms of income tax, the rich also have an incentive to make the ladder more difficult to climb. If I pay higher income taxes on higher income, that will leave me less of my own money to invest. And that, alongside with additional unnecessary regulations, will actually serve as a soft barrier to entry. What in the world is going on here? People are sending WhatsApp messages left and right, and my research and development is a big cost, and it is also a risk. So, if you go and you say, okay, other people can't do this, other people need to go and jump through this and this and this hoop, and it's going to be harder for them to get past that initial hurdle to get enough money to invest, I can kind of rest on my laurels. I've had my success, and I can stay successful without having to worry about constantly warding off competition by making myself better. So that's generally the way this game is played. And the only suckers in this system are the people that actually believe the line that taxing the rich makes the rich feel it. Because there's yet another aspect of this that does not get mentioned, does not get felt by the rich. So let's say Bobby starts an ice cream company, and he sells 1 million ice cream cones for $1 a piece. He makes $1 million, and let's say his materials cost 20 cents a piece. So he spends $200,000 of it to buy cones and ice cream freezers, and so on. So Bob has made $800,000. And let's say he winds up paying 20% of it in tax. So 1/5 of 8. Okay, all right, we'll make it easier and say he makes 1.2 million and spends 200,000 of that. So he will wind up making a net of 1 million before taxes, and paying 20% of that, so 200,000. So he winds up with $800,000 profit that his business made, and then he can go and decide, oh, I'm going to take a salary from that, but I'll funnel the rest of it into the business or start another venture. Meanwhile, let's say somebody is paid a salary of $1 million. Someone's paid a salary, that same person will pay $400,000 in taxes about. The same person will pay nearly twice as much in taxes as Bob because the person was working as an employee rather than as a business owner. Now, that over time is huge. And that can be the difference between retiring wealthy and, well, not. Let me go and see if anybody's wanting to comment anything on this. Nobody's commenting anything yet, so I guess I'll continue with this little story time. So Bob starts his business, and then I look and I see, okay, Bob had $200,000 in overhead. Or he had $200,000 in costs that it took him to make 1.2 million. But I have a better ice cream cone making machine. I can make the same bunch of ice creams for $150,000, thus making $50,000 extra dollars per year if I do Bob's business strategy of selling $1.2 million worth of ice cream. Or I would need to sell less ice cream in order to make the same profit. I've innovated, right? So Bob won't, or I'll be able to undercut him in price instead of, selling it for $1, I could sell it for 95 cents and put a booth right up next to his, and everyone else will go to my booth instead of his because mine is 5 cents cheaper. And I'm still making the same profit, right? So Bob wouldn't want that to happen because it's going to force him to make a better product. It's going to force him to innovate. So if he can go and spend a little bit of that money up front to pay off a politician or a few politicians that are going into office to make extra rules for ice cream makers that they need to pay for licensing costs, and they need to pay for constant inspections, and they need to use a certain specific kind of machinery, which is the same kind of machinery that Bob uses. Well, Bob now has $800,000 in the bank to cover all these compliance costs. Meanwhile, I don't. So, if I want to get started, I need to go and take a gigantic loan to be able to do what Bob was doing. Meanwhile, he doesn't have any debt. So, that means that he, by virtue of the fact that he erected all these barriers to entry, might make my costs go up to $400,000 or $500,000 in order to do business, depending on what kinds of crazy regulations he's promoting. Meanwhile, he can go and pay that extra upfront amount, or he can basically have himself already be compliant, say basically do things my way. So whatever little fees come his way, he'll just be able to pay them and not have a problem. Meanwhile, I'm stuck not being able to do that. And Bob can go and then say, oh, well, I'm being compliant, I'm doing all these things, I am giving you, the consumer, good ice cream. It's government-approved ice cream, after all. And even though I could be making better ice cream and selling it, it would therefore be illegal for me to do so because of the barriers to entry erected by Bob. So, both the tax structure employed by Bob and the barriers to entry that he would use or that he would erect by paying the politicians prevents me from making both him and me sell better ice cream at a lower price point. Of course, this entire thing is contingent upon the idea that people will buy better ice cream at a lower price rather than worse ice cream at a higher price. And this is the difference. This is the primary difference in between the idea of allowing the free market to decide things versus having government intervention. The government intervention can sound good. The high taxes on rich income can sound fair, or rather sound, oh, like we're sticking it to the big man. But in the end, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? In order to cover the increased compliance costs, Bob is going to be selling more expensive ice cream to make the same profit. He's not going to let that eat into his profits. He is going to do what he can to get the maximum profit out of his system. So, if he raises any kind of tax, if he causes any kind of compliance costs to exist, every single penny of that is going to get passed down right to the eater of the ice cream. Right to the eater of the ice cream. So no matter what you try to slap on the rich, ultimately it falls to the poor, or it falls to whoever the end consumer happens to be. And so, every single time someone tries to do this, they don't wind up getting what they want. The prices of things go up, and they feel like things are even more unfair, which they are. But what they don't understand, and what nobody in the government or nobody in business wants them to understand, or very few people do, is that this excessive taxation of the rich and other erection of barriers to entry is what's causing the trouble in the first place. The problem isn't the businessman. The problem is that the businessman can pay the government to do him favors. And the businessman can go and set up, or pay the government to set up tax laws to do him favors. Because ultimately, if someone is perched up at the top of some power system, he's gonna want to keep it for the most part. Now, Say's law essentially states that consumption is not the driver of the economy. Production is. Now, what does that mean? And how does it relate to what we're talking about here? Say's law, saying that the production drives the economy, means that it's actually better. The end result of Say's law is it's better for everyone if everyone is rich. Meaning that if you are producing a bunch of stuff, and I'm producing a bunch of stuff, and everyone else is producing a bunch of stuff, we will all be able to get more of what it is we want by trading what we're producing for what other people have. As opposed to thinking from a consumer perspective, which is basically, okay, the central bank prints money, buys government bonds, the government gives the money out to pay for certain projects. And that inflates the money. That is an inflationary measure. So there's actually, all that ever does is divert work into whatever the government decides is important, as opposed to what I or you or Bob wants. So Say's law says that the more I produce, the more I'm going to be able to buy with the fruits of my labor. Now, money is, in that particular sense, the monetary worth of what I produce is the monetary worth of what I can buy. And ultimately, all of this is based off of making good deals. Making good deals is the foundation of negotiation. It's the foundation of trade. And ultimately, if everyone goes into a negotiation with the power of veto, saying, no, I'm not going to do that deal, but I'll counter with this offer, eventually everything winds up developing a price point. And the more that is produced, if the same amount of money is in circulation, the prices will go down, which makes everything more affordable for everyone. Now, lots of people disagree with Say's law. They think, well, okay, we can cheat the system. We can fool people by artificially putting more money into the system. Well, all that ever does is change the scorekeeping of who owes whom how much. And it favors those that have the means of production as opposed to those who are just starting out, because it becomes even more difficult to have capital. Now, of course, if you go and you take a loan out, it also favors the borrower of the loan and this is a big if the borrower of the loan goes and decides to produce something with that money, to do something to make more money out of it. But the difficulty comes is that if everyone then starts going and taking out loans of this money, eventually it gets to the point where somebody can't pay back the loan. And if nobody's paying back their loans and defaulting on loans, then all this money just goes poof into thin air and proves that this money that came out of thin air in the first place doesn't actually exist. And because people took loans of that nature for houses in the early 2000s, this was the cause of the 2008 financial crisis. People weren't able to pay back their loans, and because certain people's jobs were contingent upon those loans being paid, it started a series of chain reactions that wiped out a great deal of the world economy. Right, so all of these factors interplay with each other, and ultimately, the system is rigged such that you need to have people that are intelligent enough and manipulative enough and cunning enough to be able to see past the smoke and mirrors and understand how it is that you actually judge production, and how it is that you actually judge value, and how do you know that you're getting a good price for something. All right, now financial assets, stocks, bonds, how's all of that stuff is overpriced. Now, of course, if things are overpriced, that means other things can certainly be underpriced, and you can go and figure out what is valuable, which is certainly a part of investing. And it involves just doing your homework. But going back to the basic point here is number one, taxing the rich is bad for the poor. Number two, erecting barriers to entry for the rich is bad for the poor. And most importantly, number three, focus on producing things. Don't focus on consuming things. If you focus on consumption rather than production, you will always, always, always be a slave to whoever's giving you whatever it is that you're wanting to consume. Whether it be being a slave to government if you get government money, or being a slave to your employer if all you're doing is spending the money that you make in the job without saving or investing. So, be wise with your money, and don't let people trick you. Don't let people play with your emotions, because if you're starting to feel really good when other people play with your emotions, what you're actually doing is playing into their hands. And I have a secret for you. However much they tell you that they care, they don't. They don't. They are in it for themselves. And they themselves have a fallacious understanding of things because they don't believe Say's law. Or even worse, if they do believe Say's law, they would rather be poor in an absolute value, but be king of the dunghill, than to be a lower way up a much higher hierarchy. They'd rather be on top of a dunghill than a third of the way up the pyramid. And because that dynamic, because the serotonin system exists in all of us, it's a constant struggle, especially for the more emotional ones of us, to see past the smoke and mirrors, because those smoke and mirrors are emotionally very, very powerful. Now, at this point, I'm going to leave things open to questions. anyone interested in asking anything, any questions, any comments, any concerns? Do you think I'm full of crap? How do you think that this is all going? And in the meantime, if any of you do want to answer, I'm going to continue to talk about a few other things. This stream is going to be a little bit shorter than most due to the fact that I just was driving for 10 hours. So I don't really have all that much to go on, and I'm on pure adrenaline and caffeine right now. I'm going to crash here in just a little bit. But basically, I am thinking that this is going to be the first of many installments on emotions and economics. This is about how taxing the rich makes us feel versus what taxing the rich actually does. And there are many other aspects of economics that, if we let our emotions override our behavior, we can find ourselves making poor choices. And because I care about you, because I actually understand Say's law, first off, from a selfish perspective, and I know that having you being able to be financially independent and you being able to make good financial decisions is good for me too, I am perfectly willing to share this kind of information with you. In fact, anyone that actually understands what's going on in the economy and cares for themselves is going to want to share this same information. And yes, the selfish part of me thinks, yeah, I want to have smart people that are watching my channel being financially adept. Because I have ideas, I have cool things that I would like to do, and I would like to be able to partner up with people who are financially literate and who have a little bit of free time or a little bit of funds to be able to work on projects with me. I think that financial literacy is one big goal. I think that education and revamping the educational system and starting educational businesses is a worthwhile goal. There are all these different things in life that I'd like to be able to do that necessitates other people. It necessitates other people coming on board with these ideas. But if the people that are coming on board with these ideas aren't equipped to implement them, then that was going to reflect poorly on everybody. Now, if you're not interested in implementing these ideas, you don't have to. But I still would suggest that for your own good, you go and implement your own ideas, your own things that you want to produce, your own views of life in the world, and perpetuating them and propagating them. So that's that. Now there's another piece, and this is by Mr. Ron Rule. He had I'll copy this link. The question is it more libertarian to do a per head tax over a tax rate system? Which is quite relevant to what it was that we were just talking about. Hello, Mr. Beers. Good to see you. Is there any degree of income equality that I would consider unacceptable? If it came to that point, what would be an effective way of dealing with it? That is simultaneously a very easy question to answer. Well, income equality, income inequality. I mean, you could. They're two sides of the same coin, right? So you just deal with low income equality or high income inequality. Same thing. So yeah, I get what you're saying, Jacob, and I'm saying that this is actually a very easy question to answer if certain preconditions are fulfilled. If certain conditions are fulfilled. In a free market, I think that any degree of income inequality is perfectly fair and good, because a free market does not preclude anyone from working in it. A free market does not stop me from going and producing value. And if I go find a rich person, let's say I have nothing, but I go find a rich person and I propose him an idea that will make him more money or get him more of what he wants, well, I will be able to get a piece of the pie as I am generating him value. So actually having more rich people around and having more people that are more rich means that if I have the right attitude, there will be more for me to get my hands into. Now, if I am envious, if I am jealous, if I don't like the idea that somebody else has more than I do, then I could see how income inequality might seem to be bad. Then I'm also going to say that I think that there are certain kinds of income that are bad to get. But those are the kinds of incomes that are essentially stealing. If I become rich, but the way that I do it is by starting a business but then paying off politicians to get rid of all the competition in whatever sneaky way I can come up with, and then make myself look good and make everyone else look like a turd. Yeah, that goes for every other type of inequality. The envy part, yeah. If I can do that and I get rich, then people have a reason to hate me. People have a very good reason to hate me if I get rich by doing that. Because I stomped on their opportunities and I used part of their tax money to do it. That is unfair. That is true inequality. That is inequality of us as persons, because I am stepping on you as opposed to generating value for you if I become rich that way. That kind of income inequality, I think, is horrible. But I think the solution is not taxing the rich more, because all that will ever do is hurt the poor. All that will ever do is hurt the people who have to buy the stuff the rich people are selling. The way to fix income inequality is to make the market free and to level the playing field in terms of taxation, not by having increased tax rates on the rich or increased price the price needs to, well, compliance prices, but rather letting people get rich by doing things and letting people fall by being so big that they can't efficiently respond to a particular niche need in the market, and therefore make other people rich by either collaborating or getting outcompeted. So I think that the two things that actually need to happen are people need to stop getting their income in a bad way, and people need to learn to have a value-producing mindset. If you fix those two issues, then the place where everyone winds up will be fair. And there will be a great amount of social mobility. Furthermore, the people that understand Say's law will be instrumental in helping poor people to become rich. Not even necessarily because they like poor people, but it's certain. I mean, I like people. I love people. I want what is best for people. And I will do it out of that motivation. But I know there are some people that couldn't care less and still would help other people get rich. because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. No, fixing the issue of people getting income in a bad way entails regulation not of the people that are doing business, but regulation on the size of the government, right? Because if all right, let's say there's a regulation for how much I can give to a candidate. Well, I can go and find ways of circumventing that. I can just start a bunch of businesses under and call them a bunch of different things and not incorporate in different places, not let the IRS know things. There are ways around that, right? So the biggest thing to notice is that the problem all happens when government starts to go and play cronyism. Cronyism is where this all starts. And then all of these other bad things are offshoots therefrom. So the thing that needs to be done is make the government so weak that it can't do the interference in the economy that it wants to do. Don't make it profitable for people to go into politics for the purpose of selling political favors. Just don't make that profitable and nobody will do it. That entails getting rid of the power of the government. So I suppose you could call it regulation of sorts, but it would not be government regulation in that government is doing the regulating. It would be us regulating the government. And therefore us having more freedom and the government having less of our freedom. That is how this whole idea generally should work. I hope that this at least provided a little bit of a different perspective on how to look at this particular issue. Because it's certainly very different than what it is that you might learn if talking to a civics professor or a professor even many economists. Of course, some of the classical economists, some of the Austrian economists would tend to agree with me. The social changes will come from technology, and if you want, and ultimately, one of the biggest thing, yes, decentralization. Certainly, Caleb, you were right on point. There's another word for that that's called the black market, and that's the difficulty. Gray and black markets form when the real market, the legal market, winds up going and not doing favors for people and winds up creating bad conditions. Now, what ultimately is going to wind up happening due to the decentralization is governments are going to either need to change or realize that their cash flow is going to stop. Either they're going to wind up having to get central banks to print more money, therefore making it worthless and causing hyperinflation, which isn't good, or the central governments will wind up having to decrease their taxes and therefore make legitimate business doable. So either of those kinds of responses are going to ultimately cause the government to collapse in size, or at least in the scope and the reach and the extent of its power. Yeah, but you don't need to use Google, and you certainly don't need to use Amazon. This is technology causes decentralization. Don't buy stuff off of Amazon if you don't want to. Nobody's putting a gun to your head saying buy from Amazon. Nobody's putting a gun to your head saying search on Google. Nobody's even putting a gun to your head saying watch me on YouTube. I mean, I could go and find some other streaming platform if you guys want to give me donations. If you guys want to give me donations, I'll go and start up my own website and stream to it, and you guys can watch me there if you don't want to go and give view time to Google. There are all sorts of workarounds that the free market provides, and if enough people decide they don't want to use Google or don't want to use Amazon, well, either Google and Amazon are either going to need to shape up or ship out. That's the nice thing, is the free market ultimately winds up being a thing of one man, one vote, and that vote counts because it is a transactional kind of a vote. It's not a democratic kind of a vote. And so you wind up getting what it is that you want from the free market, whereas dealing with the government, it's kind of a who can bully whom. That's why I fear government way more than I do any corporation. Because the government's what can show up with guns. Yeah, Walmart. Yeah, the kind of centralization that is domain specific in place to certain people. Yes, yes, Caleb, exactly. No, well, there are, Caleb. You're saying it's not really central. There are loci, but the fact of the matter is, new loci in a free market can spring up, and where the cash flows is where the cash flows, and people can vote with their dollars. Now, I'm not going to blame Google or Amazon if people are voting with their dollars to buy stuff from Google, or not to buy stuff, but to search stuff from Google and to buy stuff from Amazon. Don't go complaining about them. Nobody, if you're going to complain about them, then don't use their services. And if you have a better idea, well, then go find a venture capitalist and propose your idea and implement it yourself. Well, technology will advance to the point where, well, you know how to program, don't you, Jacob? They can only spy on you if you give them your consent. No, that'd be like complaining. Not now. Certainly, I would say. Oh yeah, and there will always be, a battle over technology, and ultimately, quantum computing is quantum computers are going to be a really interesting addition to the mix. Well, Jacob, that's very admirable of you to be concerned about society as a whole. I would suggest that the best way that you can actually help society as a whole would be to live your own personal life appropriately. And if you can bring to the market a solution for the problems that you're finding, people will pay for it, assuming that they see the same kinds of things. If you don't want people to be spied upon, then you can go and make a new web browser. You can go and decide that at my home and in my sphere of influence, this is the way things are going to happen. You have a great amount of control, Jacob, and way more in your circle of influence than does Google. Yeah, people can use Google as a service, but people can also use DuckDuckGo. People can go and write their own search engine. I mean, obviously, you would need to have enough computing power to be able to run it, but the fact of the matter is, search engines are dead easy to write. It's just a question of running them. And to think that you could conceivably use services of the service that you're trying to oust in order to oust them is kind of funny. Just be creative and don't despair. Because despair will I think, and I'm guilty of this a lot of the time, but despair does this thing to you where you start seeing only problems and no possibilities. And if there is even a hint of freedom in the market, then it's worth it to constantly try to put these new ideas forth, to constantly do all these new things. and see what grabs hold and what doesn't, and then you just take the ideas that work and you run with them. And then you can introduce some of your other ideas bit by bit as you develop your reputation and so on. Ultimately, going and expecting the government to solve the problem is going to wind up causing way more problems down the road that are associated with having poop heads going and trying to solve the problems by using force, rather by using force and coercion and the power of the government as opposed to the power of the free market. If you try to make a product that was disruptive enough, well, decentralization would definitely help. What if nobody knew who you were? What if nobody knew who you were? And what if you were paid in such a way that nobody could trace the payment to you? What if you were just a faceless, caring person? What if you were the Dark Knight? Um, remember, yeah, equivalent product. Uh, and if you really do care as much about humanity as you do, saying that it's more about society as a whole than your own personal choices, then you won't mind dying for the cause. And here's the thing, right? If someone really does believe in something, that person will be okay with dying for the cause. And of course, you're not going to be stupid about it. You're going to take all the proper precautions. But I know you're smart enough to do that. I know you're smart enough to do that. I would guess that everybody watching the stream is. And maybe even the person giving the stream. You know, it's if you just think about I believe that it was Yuri Maltsev. He was a defector from the Soviet Union who said, well, the CIA, a Central Intelligence Agency with no intelligence, he said the CIA needed to learn about the fall of the Soviet Union by reading the Washington Post. And I know that's said with tongue in cheek, but the fact of the matter is, if you're intelligent and you're motivated, you're driven, and you act in accordance with your set of values, you're going to push the world forward a whole lot more than if you try to hijack government resources to do the same. One, as the saying goes, one volunteer is worth 10 pressed men. And that literally means that with a group of about 100 people, you can do a lot. You can do a great deal with the right group of 100. You can do a great deal with the right group of 20. You can do a great deal with the right group of 2. These sorts of things are quite doable, Jacob. These things are doable. You do not need to despair, and know that you have allies. Oh, there my wife is. Yeah, you have allies. And the more you network, the more you connect with people, the more allies you will have. Of course, the more potential saboteurs you'll have as well. But you know, use your good judgment. And you know, life is a risk. Every single day is a risk. And I'm just saying, I would rather take the risks and actually live than play it safe and be complacent and watch the whole world around me go to hell. That's my opinion on the matter, and that's my choice. And ultimately, I wind up making a bunch of mistakes when I'm pursuing my goals. But the fact of the matter is, I keep on going. And who knows? I might wind up with a bullet in my brain. But what I've been doing so far, at least there's a repository, a small repository of stuff that I've done. And I guarantee you, if I wind up dead, you guys can go and say, hey, look, this person had these ideas and he wound up dead. Now, let's go and push this even further because they wouldn't have killed him unless he was onto something. Rather than letting people rule through fear, just have the right attitude, and definitely don't give up your Second Amendment rights. Because when it comes to bullet in the back of the head, better him than me. Thank you, Mr. Beers. So that's at least all I have to say on that particular topic for now. Any other questions or any follow-ups? I know this is just a gigantic load of information that calls many sacred cows all at once, and if you or anyone watching this wants to rewatch and you can't. It's like trying to shoot down an entire flock of birds. Caleb, you were right. The prevention of centralization is a bit of a contradiction. If you're decentralized, what is there to stop something else from centralizing? Let's say, I can't believe that comment didn't show up for me until just now. Situations have always gone such that if a power structure gets too big, it crumbles from within. The Soviet Union crumbled from within. We're dealing with elements of human nature. And as long as we understand how humanity behaves, we are able to use that to our advantage. And then we also need to be patient. We need to be patient. And the nice thing is, we may not need to be as patient as people did in the past due to the fact that ideas move more quickly nowadays than they ever have before. And ideas will only ever continue to move more quickly. No, the centralized force doesn't win, Jacob. I know that it may seem that way, and I know that it may be cause for despair. But just remember, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Show me one single centralized force throughout all of history prior to the ones that currently exist that hasn't collapsed upon itself upon overreaching. Look at history. Analyze history. Analyze history to the biggest extent that you can. And whereas story by story by story may give you despair, looking at the big picture may give you hope. And yes, we may wind up being in certain aspects at least very dark times, and in other aspects some of the best times in the history of the world. We can always control our attitude, and in as much as we are in control of our own faculties, we can control our own actions. Sitting there moaning about a centralized force isn't going to do anything about it. doing something about it is going to do about it. Now, even having this conversation here and bringing it up as something to be concerned about, who knows, this video might go viral. Who knows how many people will see this? Who knows how many people will want to be your ally? You never know. All you can keep on doing is the right thing and never giving up. Out of all the things that we do have control over, our attitude and our choice to persist are two of the biggest. Our IQ is largely fixed. Our mental structures are largely fixed. Our minds are neuroplastic, and certainly our thought processes can be changed, but that takes a lot of time and effort. But if we can go and figure out how to have the right attitude, we will be able to accomplish a great amount. Yes. Exactly. And the fact of the matter is, taking care of yourself, going off of what Caleb Beers says about the centralized force wins, judging by how things are at the moment. And Caleb says only if the decentralized are wimps. And so I would say man up. I would say man up. That is what needs to be done. And obviously that means that masculine hormones are necessary. So testosterone, working out, going and making ourselves physically and mentally robust. Physically and mentally, even using the terminology and the understanding of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, anti-fragile, will cause us to be mentally more resilient. The better we take care of ourselves, and the better we learn to articulate ourselves, and the better and the more consistently we go and pursue our goals, the more serotonin we will have, the more testosterone we will have. The better we take care of our bodies, the better our hormonal balance will be, and therefore we will be able to go and see opportunities that may have been staring us in the face, but our attention would have directed us elsewhere, due to the fact that we had a particular attitude that is different than the one that we have now. There are all these elements about our own lives that we do have control over, and each and every one of these elements is of crucial importance. So it starts with very, very basic habits. It starts with doing these very, very basic things consistently, but then over time, after doing them over and over again and living with purpose, you will begin to see results. And you know, it might not happen in our lifetime, although it might. I can't promise you the time scale of anything, but I can promise you that you can have a much bigger input on the trajectory than you might think that you do, because most people are walking zombies. So very few, I mean, everyone has the world on a string, so to speak, but very few people ever pull. How do I suggest combating the militant feminists who despise the concept of masculinity, laughing in their faces? Oh yeah, Caleb, you're... I laugh at them. They fear men. Yeah. You can, one funny way of doing it is, just say, hey, and the thing is, men aren't actually... You don't need to fear men unless you're doing the wrong thing, or unless they are fearful bad ones. Yeah, thus spake Caleb Beers. For those of you watching the stream, after the fact, after it's actually been streamed as a video. If the chat is available, I highly recommend looking at it. The conversation going on is quite important. But yeah, militant feminists who despise masculinity. Many of them actually. I mean, laughing does certainly help the cause in general. But if they it's also possible to befriend them. If you want to put the effort in, it's totally possible to befriend them. The difficulty therein is it's kind of hard to do unless they assume your goodwill. And so you just need to blatantly project what it is that you believe in and be unabashed about it. If you know that you have the high ground, if you know that what you're suggesting and perpetuating is good, then you don't have anything to fear. Feminists, that is third wave feminists, they don't have a clue. They're not living in reality. They don't have power except in as much as a camera's pointed at their face, right? So, I mean, what do they actually have of value to give the world? I mean, anybody who's anybody knows that it's a joke. It is a joke. Now, if a woman is being mistreated or treated wrongly, then deal with it on an individual-to-individual basis. And be far more harsh on the men that are actually causing problems, as opposed to just going and categorically declaring men as bad. I mean, that masculinity is the reason society as we know it and everything as we know it works. Masculinity is the reason we have bridges. Masculinity is the reason we have civilization. Masculinity is the reason that we're still not living in caves. Testosterone, serotonin, dopamine, and strong bodies have accomplished a great deal indeed. Human ingenuity is, of course, the biggest resource we all have. But the way that ingenuity is applied to the world is done very differently categorically by men than by women. We are different. We are not the same. And certainly women can go and do things too, but the fact of the matter is we have different hormonal systems. We have different neuronal wiring. We can go and fulfill the role that nature has seen fit to give us, and also wind up following what it is that we see as good. It may not be the easiest thing in the world to do. I mean, I'll go ahead and say that doing the right thing is hard. Doing the right thing is incredibly difficult. But it's worth it. It's completely worth it. You know, getting a hold on our own darkness, getting a hold of our own, going back to the original context of this, our own envy, dealing with our own vice, and learning to stand firm in virtue is exceedingly important. We should first focus on cultivating virtue, and after that worry about all the other things that fall into place, because we won't be in a position of doing anything unless we are cultivating that virtue. Given the fact that I am about ready to have a coughing fit and completely run out of energy, I am going to thank all of you profusely for watching this stream, for participating therein. And I'm going to let you know that Caleb is going to be streaming, to the best of my knowledge, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. Go check out Mr. Caleb Beer's YouTube channel after. Actually, I can already go and put a link into the description of this video. And then Caleb will also be streaming on Saturday at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. And I highly, highly recommend looking at him. Ah, Mr. Beers is on Discord. I think I will peace out of the stream now. And as I said before, thank you profusely for watching. Do tune into the parlor. That's Caleb's show. It's very, very good. And I very much appreciate all that Caleb has put together. Thanks, and see